Welcome to the We Are Change talk show. This is episode 17. Thank you very much for joining me. This episode we have left the studio and interviewed a victim of police corruption. So we'll cross over to that story now. We're here with Gallijess, who has suffered from a miscarriage of justice and tragic family matters. Thank you for joining me today, Gallijess.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate this.
So this has been a horrible experience that you've suffered. How did this all begin?
How it all started is my father passed away in 2009, and during we had laid him to rest, an officer had basically contributed in manufacturing false reports to exclude me out of the family home.
Right, so it was false reports and you had your identity stolen. So basically your father had perished and they denied you access to the family home, is that correct?
That is correct. The way they went about it, there was an officer, a sergeant, had basically manufactured a false statement that I committed family violence and used an application for an intervention order as means of a sword rather than a shield.
Right. So you depended on the legal system to look after you, and they did the exact opposite. This was a horrendous experience. Tell me, how exactly have you felt suffering through all of this? What exactly have been your biggest obstacles?
The greatest obstacle is the letdown by the Victorian police, professional standards, ethical standards and police officer integrity that had conducted an investigation. When first a sergeant had identified that the information that was supplied to the courts against me was totally false and made up, because the officer was involved, it became for them a conflict of interest. But in saying that, they determined a revocation order be met. So the evidence then was later withheld by another sergeant that happened to have interfered. And this sergeant then obviously, I believe, constructed a payback for reporting, inappropriate misconduct to the ethical standards. Later, I was told by another detective from the Department of Ethical Standards that what they stated was that the officer that had identified my injustice had been threatened to be bullied and threatened to be bashed. And I thought, this is not right.
So you filed numerous complaints?
Yes.
And you see it as a clear-cut retaliation to these complaints, and you've been targeted directly.
That is a total 100%. I have been more in a form of retribution against me, in the fact that police officers would stoop so low as to then make and invent allegations against me that was so horrendous. An allegation that they brought upon me was identified to be staged up, where after having learnt how to investigate the cases and the way the police conduct the investigations, I learnt that I had to record them, and as soon as I recorded the officer and got his face on camera, he basically admitted and he confessed that he had nothing to do with it. It was a setup. He resigned from that case. I ended up in hospital because I almost attempted suicide, and that was just tragic in the way. And all I got was from professional standards was, well, sorry, the case is being investigated. Who was the officer? We can't give you this information, and that was just a total letdown.
It's a disaster, and it's a complete fabrication of evidence that was put forward, false and misleading information, and it also resulted in unlawful imprisonment, didn't it, Gallijess?
Yes. What took place then, when everything was able to be investigated and determined, I had a personal apology by an officer, another sergeant. He said, I'm totally sorry on what has taken place. Given the fact of my history of being a Christian background, he himself was a Christian. He came out and said, mate, I apologise. The officers acted in a way that were inexperienced. I was unlawfully arrested. I was taken into custody. I wasn't allowed to have a statement taken. The officer that arrested me, a senior constable, then issued a safety notice to exclude me from seeing my mother, which was disconnected in seeing her. But she then confessed in a recorded conversation saying, I made up my own version of the story. I know you would not hurt your mother.
Have you ever harmed your mother in the past?
Never. I'm a person who has never ever had any criminal records. And in court, the officers said that I was amicable. They said he's never behaved irrational, anything like that. But in saying that, because I had the two recordings, Sergeant Borsinos comes along and says, oh, the matter was deemed a family violence matter. And when I said, Sergeant Borsinos, in a recorded conversation that I taped him, if I hadn't taped him, that board wouldn't be out there, and I don't think I would be where I am here today. Sergeant Borsinos admitted confession in the sense that he's saying that the matter was deemed a family violence, that he got it from Sergeant Warren Hutchison. When I spoke to Sergeant Warren Hutchison, he said Borsinos is a liar. He never said anything because he wasn't privy to it. When I said to Sergeant Borsinos, do you realise what you've stated? My sister under oath said that there was no violence. And I said, I've got a recording of you stating that. All of a sudden, I seen him just run. I met him in front of the street. I exposed him. I said, listen, you know you've lied. He put his head down in shame and walked away. Now, this is a guy coming from an ethnic background.
Yes.
He should know better about families.
So you brought it straight to their attention,
Yes.
even brought it straight to their face.
Right.
And the reception that you experienced was very cold and very dismissive, wasn't it?
It was more or less bullying, harassment, and what got then, as soon as I exposed the evidence, the professional standards, the recordings, the IBAC, what did I get? A phone call saying, Mr. Gallijess, apparently you put a hit on a woman, that we need to investigate you and see about this hit. I said, what? You're going to be kidding me. Now that I've put a hit on someone? And then it was determined, oh no, sorry, we made a mistake. It was another. Then I got another allegation called and said, oh, apparently there was a car theft. We believe that you're involved in a car theft. Excuse me? So you can see what was going on. It got to the point, after the IBAC had determined, what took next was my security suspension on my licence.
Right.
They've suspended it as a payback. IBAC determined that...
On what grounds?
The grounds were basically no investigation. There was nothing conducted. All I got was a letter saying your security licence has been suspended on prohibited weapons. And I rang up the security licensing and I spoke to a Sergeant Jim Peachy. I said, what's the security licence? What do you mean by prohibited weapons? He goes, oh look, don't worry about all that, Mr. Gallijess. All you need is a psychologist, a report, and you'll get your intervention order.
So were you in possession of any firearms at the time?
There was no prohibited weapons, and the truth behind all this is when I contacted to inform them what's this about prohibited weapons, apparently a Sergeant Dennis Tucock, who signed off on the suspension of my security licence, he gave confession. He said, Mr. Gallijess, this suspension document fell on my desk. I was the one that drafted it. I just signed it. I said, well, who made the investigation? He goes, there's no one investigating it. I go, what? So you could see this. It was a personal payback, and I had the corrupt Deputy Mark Galliot, and I'm making that clear. IBAC had appointed the Chief Commissioner at the time, Ken Lay, to take this serious misconduct.
The corruption goes right to the top, doesn't it?
Right to the top. And this Deputy Mark Galliot, who was the Assistant Commissioner to the Chief Ken Lay at the time, said, I don't care what IBAC says. That's exactly it. It was straight to the line. And so then I came to realise at the end of the day, IBAC and professional standards and the Victorian Police, mate, they're all sleeping together.
So somebody goes to report corruption, they contact IBAC, and basically the situation as it be, the police are investigating themselves and then clearing themselves of any wrongdoing.
Yes, and what nobody knows that I've been told by IBAC, the reason for this, because IBAC has no jurisdiction. They don't have the power to overturn any kind of investigation made by police. So if IBAC determines, yes, Sergeant Borsinos was a corrupt cop, yes, he perverted the course of justice, then the police will come in and say, well, hang on, we don't believe that he did, we'll sign off. Now, when that gets back to IBAC says, sorry, we don't have the authority or the jurisdiction to invade or investigate a matter that has already been finalised by Victorian Police, which is nothing but delusional by IBAC. They're more or less misleading the public. They're not about assisting the community. They're all about delivering a document to the police, The police get the document, they stamp it as, no, we don't see any inappropriate behaviour, and you're left out in the cold, and unfortunately, your allegations that have been made to you are being stuck.
And you reach a dead end.
Yes.
So all the problems that you've experienced, you've ended up suicidal, and you've had those tendencies and suicidal ideation. How is that at present, your mental health?
It's interesting you say that with suicide, because what got me the strength was I realised that the Victorian police have a lot of mental issues they're stating, and officers are committing suicide, which is really sad. And I have my heart open to these officers that are being bullied and targeted, Victorian police themselves, and there is nobody, not professional standards, nor IBAC, helping these people. Senior Constable Michael Mains is a great example. He should be alive today. Instead, all he gets is a helicopter parade to say we're sorry 9 years later. I blame IBAC and professional standards. Had they done the appropriate steps, then he would be alive, and many officers would be alive. So it's not just myself that has almost attempted suicide, because when I was accused of being basically a pedophilia, that just really got me right. There's no more worse crime than that. It doesn't get any worse, correct?
Yeah, and was there ever any evidence to substantiate that?
The evidence was that it was a setup. The whole thing was 32 sexual allegations that they put on me. When I contacted the father had told me, Laura Vitale, she never stated it. She never even went to the police. And how the cops got undone, because I filmed them, and Detective Wassell became a corrupt cop because he perverts the course of justice in not turning around and saying, hang on, yes, you have been set up. Instead, he says, I quit the case. Instead of coming forward to say, no, this is an injustice, he runs away because he's afraid of getting bullied and targeted. And that's really sad. Officers should learn to stand up against bullying and stand up and speak up.
Right, now was there a victim impact statement or any testimonials? What sort of proof did they have to file that charge?
It's interesting you say that. There has never been any proof. There's never been any investigation, so there's never been any proof. There's never been any officers speaking with the other party, because there was never any victims. In all the intervention orders, in all the allegations made about me, about the thief robbing a car and putting a hit on someone, there was never any kind of victim statement. And I found that through Freedom of Information. And again, Freedom of Information refused to give me any of the statements because there was no statements. And this is an interesting what you put on. It was just purely a setup. Nothing more than a setup.
So your conscience is clean?
My conscience is 100% clean, but the conscience of these corrupt, crooked, bent cops like Sergeant Borsinos, and corrupt, bent cop Detective Wassell, and corrupt cop Detective Ware, and the list goes on of these corrupt cops. You all should be ashamed of yourselves, especially you, Sergeant Borsinos. Grow some balls, because I tell you what, your family would be looking at you saying, why are you doing this? Why are you punishing an innocent man when you're supposed to be an example to the community? You're a police officer. For God's sake, own up to the truth before my mother dies, so she can then rest in peace. You corrupt, bent, crooked cop.
Well said. How would you describe your living conditions at present?
It's pretty harsh. I mean, I'm living homeless. I was living in a park. I lived in a park to get composure of myself, because I'm not conditioned towards society way of living. Society way of living, the drugs, the alcohol, the, growing up, having, being violent. My life was basically purely no drugs, no alcohol, no coffee, no weed, no, you name it.
That's very admirable.
Thank you, very conditional to that. But then to get officers to come up and say, well, okay, we know that you're an innocent man, we know that you've never broken the law, we're going to have to now make up some things for you so we can look good to cover up our previous mistakes. So they alleviate in making an allegation that was already proven that they had set me up go away by alleviating into another allegation to divert you into another area. And that's what I come to realise what they were doing was they kept just handballing one case to another. Yeah.
So they've slandered your reputation. Have they put you on a sex offenders register?
Senior corrupt cop Sergeant Paul Solomon, He says, Mr. Gallijess, you should be happy that you're not getting charged. What do you mean? You're not getting charged. It's not going to court. Don't worry about it. You can move on with your life. I said, I can't move on with my life. You just name me and shame me as a pedophilia. He goes, but you haven't, there's nothing been founded. I said, that's because there's never been a victim. You created this victim in this delusional, you made it up in your own head. And now that you've been caught out, you police officers, you've got professional standards to back you up. You've got IBAC to back you up. And I guarantee they'll never, ever come to the media and prove me wrong. I dare them to come forward and speak. No, you would not.
Well, a lot of these allegations were not founded. I'm glad you're naming and shaming these criminals that are operating under the guise of law enforcement.
Yes, corrupt means that they're being dishonest. And the fact of the matter is, if professional standard done their job, what they're getting paid to do, so many people wouldn't be in the situation they are now. Many in jail, many are homeless, many have been lives destroyed because professional standards had failed to act on what I'm saying on these officers that are corrupt. And this officer that, especially I named Sergeant Borsinos, I sing songs about him. Oh, Sergeant John Borsinos, you're such a corrupted cop. What I'm trying to send a message to him is say, hey, enough is enough.
And I see you've got a letter from the solicitors here.
Yes.
And it states that you've named members of the police force as corrupt and dirty. And you've done several public protests and online postings. You're very active on Facebook. These police officers should be defamed and their badges removed and their title as police officer removed. So you're active on Facebook. What other measures have you taken?
The other measures I've seen is basically I have had contact with various police officers that are good. I can put that because, we want to name some good cops are out there and they've done great jobs. And another thing I need to touch on, sadly this letter here has identified that I have called cops corrupt, but nothing has been done about it. My identity is what I'm taking the next step. What I'm trying to achieve is to get back my identity that I had before the cops had manufactured false reports. I've lost my identity. I was a martial artist. I was a person in dreams of going to Hollywood. I met Bruce Lee's daughter. I don't know if you're aware.
Wow.
Yeah, I was training with Bruce Lee's daughter. I was a sparring partner, John Cusack. My dream was to go to Hollywood. Now, this is where I'm touching the point, is where the Victorian police come in, manufacture false statements, and your life is totally destroyed. And I'm not just saying the people that are not police officers. I'm saying people that are police officers also, their careers are destroyed by this cover-up, lies and denial by IBAC and professional standards, not going straight to the target and allowing these officers that are corrupt to be apprehended and accountable. This is what I'm here for.
They slandered your reputation. You're on the verge of a very illustrious career. And have you thought about seeking the assistance from defamation lawyers?
What I've, at this point in time, given the fact that I represented myself in court, I was self-representation, I cross-examined officers, and the officers come clean. And that's still not good enough. The evidence is not good enough. Nothing is ever good enough. But then I realised is at the end of the day, the only time, which just pass on what you said about the lawyers and that, the only time that's a good time to step in is when the apology is met. So I'm working on that. I'm working with the Victorian police officers in the integral side of it to see if I get the apology. That will get back my identity.
Then you'll feel vindicated.
I will feel fantastically happy. I can move on and say, yo, and start a new chapter in my life. Now, this is where, in saying that, it's the Victorian Police Force that don't want to move on. They just want to keep coming back. Well, you keep coming, I'll keep calling you a corrupt cop.
And they have many resources to target certain individuals, such as yourself. It's the long arm of the law, and it's definitely, you've been a victim of that.
Yes, and where you mention resources, well, they used the actual break-in and entry of being into a vehicle. That that resource was a flop, total flop, because the officer quit. There was another investigation with the resource of the pedophilia, the detective unit, sexual department.
Which was unsubstantiated.
It was just a total setup. That was the total flop. It was a total hoax. You understand, you corrupt cop detective Graham Wassell. I'm still waiting for an apology for setting me up. And you corrupt cop detective Ware, do you see what I put, Rachel Ware? You're a police officer with a dummy in your mouth, me campaigning outside. What are you doing about it? Nothing. You should apologise.
Well done. And I like how you're canvassing the neighbourhood. You're taking it to the streets,
Yes.
and you're putting on protests out the front of police stations. That's another plan that you have for the future, just to proceed with that?
Yes, because, look, I don't hate the police officers for what they did. I have a Christian belief in forgiveness. I forgive them. What I can't get hold of and understand in what's so infuriating, or the hypothesis to all this matter, is that they're not coming to the terms to accept it was a setup. They knew that they were in the wrong. They knew they staged it. Now they're saying in this letter that I got from the solicitor, he clearly states, it says, we are instructed that your conduct that caused the significant distress to the members and our client concerned that the imputation had damaged their reputation. Excuse me, before you corrupt cop senior constable Kylie Barrett, before I damaged your reputation, what did you do to mine when you lied? What about your corrupt cop detective Rachel Ware? You see where I'm coming? They don't look in and say, well, hang on, we've destroyed his reputation, we've excluded him from a family home, but wait a minute, we're now feeling distressed because what we need to do is get together and campaign, form a unity where we can become strong and do what you're doing, which you're courageous in what you're doing, and I really have my heart to help you in any way, because this is the whole idea. You know, we're looking at one important thing. If you want to put this to mind, the important thing is, what we're seeing here is the future of our children. Why should they be up against this kind of sort of torment, what we see today?
That's right. It leaves you with a very bad impression, and that's long-lasting. That will carry on. The reputation of the police force is in tatters. Nobody has faith or trust in these so-called law enforcers. And so you've set up a YouTube channel, and you've had quite a bit of attention that you've received. Very positive. That's very smart that you've used that platform. And what sort of feedback have you received?
Interesting. I've received from both sides, from the police side and from the civil side. With the police, I remember a few of them have come up to me and say, hey, I'm not a corrupt cop, but you're doing a great job. That puts a smile on my face, because it shows that this cop has learned a lesson. He doesn't need to go around writing false reports. And should I say also, the positive feedback in police officers I'm getting now, they are coming forward. When I put my complaint forward to them, they say, we don't have the authority. And that's what Sergeant Borsinos, that corrupt cop, should have said when he was investigating the case for professional standards. He should have turned around and said, you know what, I see that Mr. Gallijess has been unlawfully arrested. I don't have the authority. So if the police officers don't have authority, don't invent false statements.
So what are your final statements for the viewers of We Are Change Melbourne?
For the viewers, it's very simple. If you are being a subject of bullying, and this includes the police as well, if you're being the subject of any kind of harassment by Victorian police or staging false statements, man, you know, I'm happy to speak with you, or not just saying that, but there is ways in being able to stop it from, increasing. And the first thing you need to do is get hold of the officer. Forget about professional standards. Forget about IBAC. You just say, no, this dispute's between me and you. In court, I won against the police, having a police prosecutor, basically a barrister QC that they hired. I beat him, fair and square. And the magistrate judge said, the real dispute between any officer is between you and the police officer. No one else. But as soon as they start engaging other people to get involved, the whole paperwork gets hidden undercover. So that's where I've learnt. There were some other allegations that were going to be brought up. I looked at the officer and said, listen, if you're going to start making these allegations, if you don't charge me, I'm going to start making sure you're on the billboard with the rest of them. And I'll guarantee the officer said, mate, it's all right. No worries, mate, we'll leave it at that. Have a nice day. And walked off. Because really, when you start communicating with officers, they're not really bad people. They're doing a job what they're meant to do. It's only those that make it so bad is that when you go forward and say, hey, you know, you've made a mistake, correct it, they come back at you like there's some kind of Nazism sort of characteristic where they just want to sort of throw you in any angle they can put you out and put you in jail. It's wrong. So the last, in closing, my identity has been taken, and this Assistant Commissioner, Russell Barrett, I'm asking you, please, give back my identity. Do not hide from this. Do not cover it up, because you know about this. I've got an email that Sergeant Marty Chalice had identified that you have been communicated with my response, and yet I still haven't heard a response from you. Please, I'm telling you, it is detrimental in the way, the behaviour, the character, the officers have conducted themselves. I seek a full apology.
And we here at We Are Change Melbourne wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
In achieving a resolution, and hopefully you gain that apology. If somebody felt victimised by the legal system and wanted to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
There's one way of Facebook, Gallijess Who. They can look me up on that, or basically contact yourself, and you can feed them the information. They're welcome to that.
We'll put links in the description.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
To your YouTube channel as well. And hopefully you keep getting the outstanding views that you're getting.
Yes.
And hopefully you get some support that is much needed.
Yeah. And in closing, I'd like to say, oh, Sergeant John Borsinos, you're such a corrupted cop.
Well done. We'll leave it there from We Are Change. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and it's a privilege to be on this show, and I think it's an amazing way and input that you're doing to help the community, because we need to realise that there is a lot of failure, and Victoria Police have lost the plot. They basically have lost the plot in the sense that they're not doing the job that's required when it comes to corruption, when it comes to basically protecting the innocent victims that have been marginalised and abandoned by corrupt, bent, crooked cops. Like Sergeant Borsinos, for example, wrote a false report. It was identified by professional standards that he wrote a false report. And Sergeant Nick Costandas, which this is an important way of showing how professional standards have failed, the evidence in an email that Sergeant Nick Costandas said they're not responsible. It's up to Sergeant Borsinos. Well, if that's the case, why do we have to go to professional standards? What for? What's the reason going there first in the first place? If it's Borsinos, the one that had created and incriminated me falsely, it's up to him to correct it.
Well, you've given a very powerful interview. You've exposed corruption in the extreme, and hopefully you're able to rebuild your life and move forward in a positive manner. I'm your host, Jeff O'Toole, reporting for We Are Change Melbourne, signing off. We'll leave it right there for tonight, folks. Let us know what you think about the episode in the comments section. And as a reminder, the Injustice series is doing very well on Channel 31. I make an appearance on the panel for a second time in an episode coming up, so stay tuned to Channel 31. Be sure to tune in to the We Are Change talk show next week, where we expose corruption, one episode at a time. Are you tired of hearing lies and fake news on mainstream media? Do you find it insulting to your intelligence? Well, look no further. The We Are Change talk show is here. President Trump has launched airstrikes on Syria. A lot of his prominent conservative supporters have turned against him after this action. Have you suffered human rights violations or been a victim of corruption? The We Are Change talk show would like to hear about it. Phone the number on your screen today.
Who the hell's going to listen to a little guy? You guys are, thanks.
Yes, it's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And what I hope is they don't put a mother and a child in the house, because that child will die. And no one seems to believe me.
Once again, much love to everybody at We Are Change, and I look forward to seeing you guys at more events in the future and working more closely with you.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for the call, my friend, and all the best of luck moving into the future.
Much appreciated.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. You know, the legendary Jeff.
Without the instrument
of We Are Change, we will not have a future. We will not have a country or world to leave to our children. We won't have children able to function in it. So be a part of it, join it.
We Are Change Melbourne gives those who mainstream media have ignored a voice, exposing corruption, injustice, human rights issues, and much more. We Are Change Melbourne is the voice of the people.
Yeah, this is Jeff. Met Jeff for the first time I'd met Jeff. He too is a lovely chap, and he has a YouTube channel called We Are Change Melbourne. So if any of these topics pique your interest, pop over to We Are Change Melbourne and say good day to Jeff. You've seen that video that's just going past the interview, Enough is Enough. Watch that one.
Phone the number on your screen and be connected with the We Are Change talk show.